October rain hammered Marcus Blackstone's Bentley as it died on Willow Creek Road. The billionaire CEO, who commanded boardrooms and controlled billions, stood helpless in the deluge. Then he heard a sound so faint it could have been wind through broken glass. Following the whimper into the Mitchell estate's ruins, Marcus found devastation. 15 years of decay couldn't hide what had been a home. In the darkest corner, chains rattled. The German shepherd's coat, once proud black and tan, hung like Spanish moss over visible ribs, one eye clouded white. The badge on his collar read K9 237. Marcus's knees buckled. He knew that number. God help him. He knew that number from the worst night of his life. When his trembling fingers touched matted fur, the dog this warrior reduced to bones did something he hadn't done in 15 years. Shadow cried. And the billionaire who hadn't wept since losing everything suddenly couldn't stop. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Marcus Blackstone hadn't always been hollow. 5 years ago, he'd been a different man, one who rushed home for dinner, who coached Little League, who danced with his wife Emma in their kitchen while their daughter Lily rolled her eyes. That man died on Interstate 95 when a drunk driver crossed the median. The accident took Emma and 12-year-old Lily instantly. Marcus survived, if you could call it that. Now 52. He commanded Blackstone Industries from a Greenwich mansion that echoed with absence. $8.7 billion couldn't buy a single night's peaceful sleep. He worked 20-hour days, slept in his office, and avoided the family photos his housekeeper couldn't bring herself to remove. His grief had calcified into something harder than the titanium in his spine placed there after the crash. Shadow had been magnificent once. 17 years ago, he'd graduated top of his K9 class, badge number K9 237 gleaming on his collar, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 7 confirmed saves in combat. Stateside, he'd tracked kidnappers through Connecticut woods to rescue a senator's daughter. But that final mission had broken something inside him, not his body, though his left eye went blind from the beating, and his ribs never healed right. The Mitchell family had taken him in afterward, supposedly to let a hero retire in peace. Sarah Mitchell knew the truth about her family's shame. Now 38, working at Mercy Animal Hospital, the single mother carried guilt like a chronic illness. Her father had been paid handsomely to take Shadow not for care, but for containment. She'd been 23 when it started, watching her drunk father chain the hero in their shed. Every attempt to intervene met his fists. She'd fled, but the knowledge followed her everywhere. Tom Bradley had fooled everyone for 15 years. The 73-year-old lived in a shack behind the Mitchell property, playing deaf-mute so perfectly that children threw rocks at him for sport. But every night at 2 a.m., he'd slip through the fence with food and water, whispering German commands to his old partner. Shadow had been more than his K9 unit dog, he'd been the son Tom never had. Judge Patricia Coleman would oversee what was coming. Dr. James Wright would fight for Shadow's life. Reporter Michael Chen would uncover truths better left buried. Rebecca Stone would argue law while Father Daniel Murphy sought peace. But on this October night, none of them knew that fate was about to collide with redemption on a rain-soaked Connecticut road. The merger would reshape the tech industry, and Marcus Blackstone was already 40 minutes late. $20 billion hung in the balance as his Bentley's engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The October storm had transformed Willow Creek Road into a river. His phone showed no signal. Dead zones still existed in Connecticut's forgotten corners. Even in 2024, Marcus cranked the ignition. Nothing. The rain hammered harder, turning his windshield into a waterfall. He grabbed his coat, preparing to walk, when he heard a sound so weak it barely existed. Not quite a cry, not quite a moan. Something alive, suffering. Lightning illuminated the Mitchell estate's entrance, its iron gates hanging like broken teeth. Marcus had driven past this property hundreds of times, never really seeing it. The mansion stood dark against darker sky. Windows shattered, roof partially collapsed. But the sound pulled him forward through knee-high weeds that grabbed at his Italian shoes. The front door hung askew. Inside, rain poured through ceiling holes, creating indoor waterfalls. Furniture remained where it had been abandoned, a dining table set for dinner, chairs overturned, photographs face down on mantels. The whimpering came from deeper inside. leading Marcus through rooms that stank of mildew and decay. The kitchen back door opened to what had been a garden shed, now more tomb than structure. Marcus pushed through the door and froze. In the corner, illuminated by his phone's flashlight, lay something that had once been a dog. The German shepherd's body showed every bone, skin stretched like parchment over a skeleton. One eye was clouded white, unseeing. The other tracked Marcus with an intelligence that hadn't died despite everything else. The chain was the cruelest part, not around his neck that would have been merciful. It wrapped around his torso, embedded so deeply into infected flesh that fur had grown over parts of it. Shadow, though Marcus didn't know his name yet, tried to growl. The sound came out as a wheeze. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, his voice catching. "I'm not going to hurt you." He noticed the water bowls, then 5 of them, placed just within the chain's reach. Fresh water in each. Someone had been here recently. The dog's food bowl contained scraps of bread, some meat, not enough to live on, barely enough to prevent starvation. Someone was keeping this animal alive. But why? Marcus approached slowly. Shadow's body tensed, preparing for violence that must have been routine. But when Marcus extended his hand, palm down, something shifted in the dog's good eye. Recognition, hope, or just exhaustion too complete for fear. The collar caught Marcus's attention. Despite everything, it remained intact military-grade leather with a metal plate. When his phone's light hit it, Marcus read K9 to 237, and his blood went cold. He'd seen that number before. In a police report, in nightmares, in therapy sessions he'd quit attending. "My God," Marcus breathed. "You were there. You were there that night." Shadow's eye fixed on him. And in that moment, Marcus saw not an animal but a soul that understood suffering. His hand made contact with matted fur. Shadow flinched, then stilled. The feeling under Marcus's fingers was wrong: too much bone, too little muscle, heat from infected wounds. "I'm going to get you out," Marcus promised, examining the chain. It had no lock, just metal twisted and fused by time and rust. He tried pulling. Shadow whimpered. The chain was part of him now, grown into flesh that would tear if forced. That's when Marcus saw the wall, thousands of scratch marks in the wood. Groups of 5, like a prisoner counting days. His phone's calculator gave him the number 5475. 15 years. This dog had been counting for 15 years. Under a pile of molded newspapers, Marcus found a plastic bag. Inside were photographs, protected from moisture. A younger Shadow in military gear. Shadow with a man in uniform, tall, proud, serious. Shadow receiving a medal. Shadow with a little girl on his back, both looking at the camera with joy. The girl looked familiar. Marcus's hand shook as recognition dawned. Emma. His Emma. Maybe 7 years old. Riding this dog like a pony. Shadow tried to stand. The effort was monumental muscles that hadn't properly moved in 15 years, screaming protest. He made it halfway before collapsing, but his tail moved. Not quite a wag, but an attempt. That tiny gesture of hope despite everything broke something in Marcus. "Shadow," Marcus said, reading the name from one photograph's back. "Your name is Shadow." The dog's reaction was immediate. His whole body shuddered. A sound emerged from his throat, not quite a bark, closer to a sob. How long since someone had said his name? Marcus pulled out his phone, praying for signal. One bar appeared. He called his private medical team, then demanded they bring veterinary specialists. "I don't care what it costs. Get them here now. Willow Creek Road, the Mitchell estate. Bring cutting equipment. Bring everything." While waiting, Marcus sat in the filth beside Shadow. He talked about Emma, about Lily, about the night everything ended. Shadow listened, his good eye never leaving Marcus's face. When Marcus mentioned the accident, Shadow's breathing changed. He knew, somehow, this broken creature knew exactly what Marcus was talking about. The veterinary ambulance arrived in 20 minutes. Doctor. James Wright took one look and shook his head. Mr. Blackstone, this animal is going to live. Marcus interrupted. Whatever it takes. They had to sedate Shadow to cut the chain, even unconscious. He fought, programmed by 15 years of captivity to resist freedom. Marcus held his head, whispering promises. I'm not leaving you. You're safe now. I'm not leaving you. The chain came away with chunks of infected flesh. Doctor. Wright worked frantically, applying pressure bandages, starting IV fluids. Shadow's vitals were barely readable, heart rate dangerously low. Temperature dropping, they wrapped him in thermal blankets, loading him into the ambulance. As they pulled away from the Mitchell estate, Shadow's eye opened briefly. He looked at Marcus, then at the receding shed that had been his entire world. A single tear rolled down his muzzle, the first sign that somewhere inside this broken body, a soul still hoped for kindness. Marcus held Shadow's paw as the ambulance raced toward Mercy Animal Hospital. He thought about Emma, about Lily, about the night he'd lost everything. Now, holding this dying dog's paw, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Purpose. The merger could wait. The billions could wait. Everything could wait. Because Marcus Blackstone, who'd spent 5 years dying inside, had found something worth saving. And maybe, just maybe, in saving Shadow, he might find a way to save himself. Doctor. Wright's face told Marcus everything before he spoke. The veterinary specialist had worked on combat dogs in Iraq, had seen the worst trauma animals could survive, but Shadow challenged even his experience. Multiple organ failure is beginning, Dr. Wright said, holding the test results. His kidneys are functioning at maybe 20%. Liver enzymes are critically elevated. 15 years of malnutrition has destroyed his metabolism. The infections from the embedded chain have spread to his bloodstream. Mr. Blackstone, this dog should have died years ago. But he didn't, Marcus said, not moving from Shadow's side. The German Shepherd lay sedated on the surgical table, IV lines running into both front legs. So we fight. Surgery to remove the dead tissue could kill him. Not doing surgery will definitely kill him. His heart. Doctor. Wright paused, choosing words carefully. His heart has been working overtime for so long, it's enlarged, failing. We're looking at days, maybe a week. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'll have specialists here in 3 hours. The best veterinary surgeons in the world. Cost is irrelevant. Mr. Blackstone, you need to understand. I understand perfectly. This dog survived 15 years of hell. He's not dying now. Make the calls. Johns Hopkins Veterinary Program. Cornell. Wherever. Charter flights if necessary. I want a surgical team assembled within the hour. Doctor. Wright nodded, recognizing the futility of argument. He'd seen grief make people irrational before. But something in Marcus's eyes suggested this went deeper than simple compassion. The waiting room had been quiet when a woman burst through the doors. Sarah Mitchell's scrubs identified her as staff, but her face showed personal anguish. She stopped dead, seeing Shadow through the surgical suite window. Oh my God, she whispered. Shadow. It's really him. Marcus looked up sharply. You know this dog. Sarah's hands shook as she approached the window. Know him. He lived in my family's shed. For 15 years. You're Marcus Blackstone. Aren't you the billionaire? Your family. Marcus's voice turned ice cold. Your family did this. My father, Sarah said quickly. Not me. I tried to stop it. I swear. I was 23 when they brought Shadow home. Dad said he was caring for a retired military dog. But then, she trailed off, tears flowing. I became a vet because of what I saw, because I couldn't save him then. You left him there. 15 years, and you left him there. I was terrified of my father. He was drunk most nights, violent. I tried calling animal control once. Dad broke my arm for it. Said Shadow was government property, that we'd all go to prison if anyone found out. After Dad died 5 years ago, I thought Shadow was dead too. The property was abandoned. I never imagined. She pressed her palm against the glass. Please, Mr. Blackstone, he's mine now. Dad's gone. The property passed to me. Shadow belongs with me. Marcus stood slowly, his full height imposing despite his grief-worn appearance. That dog doesn't belong to anyone. And if you think I'm letting you near him after what your family did, I have legal rights. Sarah interrupted. He's on my property. Has been for 15 years. That makes him mine by law. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. His security chief's text was urgent. Media knows, story breaking now. Within minutes, the hospital lobby filled with reporters. Someone, probably a staff member, had leaked the story. Billionaire's dog rescue hit social media with the force of a tsunami. The first pictures of Shadow emaciated, chain-scarred, one-eyed went viral instantly. Animal rights activists descended on the hospital. Counter-protesters arrived claiming Marcus was exploiting tragedy for publicity. Michael Chen from the Connecticut Examiner pushed to the front. Mr. Blackstone, is it true you're spending millions on a dog while homeless veterans sleep on streets? Can you confirm this dog was abused for 15 years? Sarah Mitchell claims ownership. Are you stealing her pet? Marcus ignored them all, but the damage was done. His past became immediate fodder. Headlines screamed about the billionaire who lost his family, who'd become a recluse, who now fixated on a dying dog. Social media divided instantly, some calling him a hero, others a privileged narcissist throwing money at his guilt. That evening, a note appeared under Marcus's windshield. Simple block letters. I know who Shadow really is. Room 7, Willow Creek Motel. Come alone. The motel was exactly what Marcus expected: peeling paint, buzzing neon, hourly rates. Room 7's door opened before he knocked. Tom Bradley stood there, tall despite his 73 years, wearing clothes that had seen better decades. You're not deaf, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Tom's voice came out rusty from disuse. Haven't spoken in 15 years. Seemed easier than explaining why I stayed. You've been feeding him. Every night, 2 a.m., never missed once. Tom gestured to a chair. The room contained military memorabilia, photographs covering every surface. Shadow featured in most young, proud, magnificent. Sit. You need to know who you're fighting for. Tom pulled out a folder marked classified with faded red stamps. Shadow wasn't just a military dog. He was the best we ever trained. My partner for 6 years. 7 Bronze Stars. A Purple Heart. Saved my life 4 times. What happened to him? The Mitchell operation. 2007. Senator Phillips's daughter got kidnapped. Shadow tracked them through 30 miles of forest, took down 3 armed men. But something went wrong during extraction. Shadow got separated from the unit, ended up behind enemy lines for 2 days. When we found him, he'd been tortured. They broke things inside him that couldn't be fixed. Tom's hands trembled, lighting a cigarette. Military wanted him put down. Said he was compromised, possibly turned. I fought it, got him retired instead. The Mitchells were paid to home him witness protection. They called it 100 grand to keep quiet and care for a hero. They tortured him instead. Robert Mitchell was Special Forces, discharged for conduct unbecoming, drunk, mean, paranoid, thought Shadow was still working, that enemies would come for him. The chain was supposedly for everyone's protection. Tom's voice broke. I failed him, my partner, my brother in arms, and I let him rot in that shed because I was too much of a coward to break cover. Why didn't you? What call the police military made it clear Shadow didn't exist officially. Any publicity would compromise ongoing operations. Men's lives were at stake. So I played mute, moved into that shack, and did what I could. 15 years of watching him die slowly, knowing I put him there. Marcus absorbed this, pieces clicking into place. The kidnapped girl, Senator Phillips's daughter. What was her name? Tom pulled out a photograph. A young girl, maybe 7, laughing while Shadow licked her face. Emma. Emma Phillips. Married some tech guy. Died in a car accident few years back. The room spun. Marcus gripped the chair's arms. Emma was my wife. Tom's cigarette fell from his fingers. What? Emma Blackstone, née Phillips. My wife. Shadow saved her as a child. And she... Marcus couldn't continue. Tom stared at him for a long moment, then laughed a broken, horrible sound. Fate's a twisted bitch, isn't it? The dog saves the girl. Girl grows up, marries you, dies in an accident. You find the dog, circle complete. There's more, Marcus said quietly. The night Emma died. The accident. There was a dog at the scene. Witnesses said a German shepherd was trying to pull people from the wreck, but he disappeared before help arrived. Both men sat in silence, understanding dawning. Shadow had been there. Somehow, some way, Shadow had been at the accident, trying to save Emma again, and he'd been punished for it, returned to his chain, left to count more days on his prison walls. The next morning, Sarah Mitchell arrived at the hospital with a lawyer. The papers were straightforward. Shadow was on her property, making him legally hers. She wanted him back immediately. Marcus's lawyer, Rebecca Stone, reviewed the documents. She has a case, weak, but a judge might side with her. Property law is clear: 15 years of possession, even negligent possession, establishes ownership. She can't have him, Marcus said flatly. Then we fight. But Mr. Blackstone, public opinion matters here. Half the internet thinks you're a saint, the other half thinks you're stealing a poor woman's dog. This could get ugly. It already had. Protesters surrounded the hospital. Some carried signs reading "Justice for Shadow." Others demanded "Rich man's guilt can't buy love." The police established barriers as tensions escalated. Someone threw a bottle. Someone else threw a punch. The riot squad was called as Marcus watched Shadow fighting for life inside, while humans fought over him outside. Judge Patricia Coleman agreed to an emergency hearing within the week. The battle lines were drawn: Marcus with resources and rage, Sarah with legal standing and growing public sympathy as a struggling single mother. Tom Bradley held secrets that could destroy everything. And Shadow, unaware he'd become a symbol, fought just to breathe through another night. The turning point had arrived, though none of them yet understood how completely their lives were about to shatter and reshape around one dying dog's refusal to surrender. Shadow's recovery defied medical logic. Dr. Wright had given him a week. He survived 2, then 3. The specialists Marcus flew in from Cornell performed miracles with surgical precision, removing dead tissue, reconstructing muscle, fighting infections that should have killed him years ago. But the real healing happened in smaller moments. The first time Shadow lifted his head without help, Marcus had been reading quarterly reports aloud, a habit he'd developed during the long hospital nights. Shadow's good eye tracked him, alert and engaged, as if understanding that these numbers meant something to the man who refused to leave his side. When Marcus's voice cracked reading about Emma's favorite charity, Shadow's paw moved slightly, touching Marcus's hand. He's relearning how to exist without the chain's weight, Dr. Wright explained, watching Shadow attempt to stand. The dog's body had adapted to carrying 20 pounds of rusted metal for 15 years. Without it, his balance was wrong, his gait uncertain. It's like an astronaut returning from space. Everything feels different. Physical therapy began slowly. Marcus hired a specialist who'd worked with military dogs recovering from combat injuries. The first session lasted 3 minutes. Shadow managed 2 steps before collapsing. Marcus caught him, whispering encouragement while Shadow panted from exertion. The second session, 4 steps. By the end of the first week, Shadow could walk the length of his recovery room, though his legs shook with effort. The nightmares were harder to address. Shadow would wake howling, a sound that sent chills through the hospital. His body would thrash, still fighting invisible chains, still counting days that no longer needed counting. Marcus learned to recognize the signs: rapid eye movement, whimpering, legs twitching. He'd place his hand gently on Shadow's side, speaking softly until the dog woke, confused and terrified until he recognized where he was. "You're safe," became Marcus's mantra. "You're safe. You're free. You're loved." The eating presented another challenge. Shadow would only consume food if Marcus was physically present, and even then, he'd eat frantically, as if each meal might be his last. Dr. Wright explained this was common in long-term starvation cases. The body couldn't trust abundance after so much scarcity. They started with small portions every few hours, gradually increasing as Shadow's digestive system remembered how to process regular nutrition. The first time Shadow actually played happened by accident. A therapy ball rolled near his bed. Shadow looked at it, then at Marcus, then back at the ball. His tail, which hadn't moved properly in 15 years, attempted something that might generously be called a wag. Marcus rolled the ball gently toward him. Shadow touched it with his nose, then pushed it back. The game lasted 30 seconds before exhaustion took over. But in those 30 seconds, Marcus saw who Shadow had been before the world broke him. Meanwhile, Michael Chen was excavating Shadow's past with journalistic fervor. His investigation revealed layers of heroism that made the current tragedy even more heartbreaking. 7 confirmed lives saved in Afghanistan, Chen told Marcus during an interview. 2 were children caught in crossfire. Shadow ran through active gunfire to pull them to safety. He took 3 bullets that day. They gave him a Purple Heart, only the 3rd dog in history to receive one. The service records Chen obtained through Freedom of Information requests painted a picture of extraordinary courage. Shadow had detected 14 IEDs, preventing countless casualties. He'd tracked enemy combatants through impossible terrain. He'd stayed with wounded soldiers, keeping them warm through freezing nights until evacuation arrived. But it was the kidnapping case that truly stunned Chen. Senator Phillips's 7-year-old daughter, Emma, had been taken by professionals, mercenaries hired by enemies of her father's anti-trafficking legislation. The FBI had given up after 48 hours. Shadow found her in 16, tracking her scent through rivers, across highways, into wilderness where no roads existed. The kidnappers had military training, Chen discovered. They knew how to throw off dogs' false trails, scent bombs, everything. Shadow ignored it all. Tom Bradley says he'd never seen anything like it. Like Shadow knew this child mattered more than mission parameters. The rescue itself was violent. Shadow took down 3 armed men, suffering a shattered eye socket that would leave him partially blind. But he got Emma out, carried her on his back for 2 miles until they reached safety. The photograph Chen found showed young Emma clutching Shadow at the hospital afterward, her face buried in his fur while he stood guard despite his injuries. The community's division over Shadow's case reflected deeper tensions. At Brennan's Diner, where locals gathered for coffee and argument, the split was geographic and economic. Wealthy residents from Marcus's Greenwich neighborhood supported him vocally, some offering to testify about his character. Working-class families from Sarah's part of town saw it differently. "Just because he's rich doesn't mean he can take whatever he wants," argued Joe Brennan, the diner's owner. "Sarah's trying to make things right. Her daddy was a bastard. But she's a good woman, works 2 jobs, raises her kid alone. Now some billionaire wants to steal the only valuable thing her family had." Others disagreed violently. "Valuable," spat Mary Torres, whose son served in Afghanistan. "They tortured that hero for 15 years, Sarah knew, and did nothing. Now she wants him back, over my dead body." The veterans were unanimously Team Shadow, which meant Team Marcus by default. They organized rallies at the hospital, standing guard in shifts to prevent any attempt to remove Shadow by force. Some brought their own service dogs, creating a protective circle of military solidarity. When protesters got too aggressive, the veterans formed human walls, silent but immovable. The transformation in Marcus was visible to everyone who knew him. His board of directors watched, stunned, as their ruthless CEO began missing meetings to attend Shadow's physical therapy. The man who hadn't taken a day off in 5 years now spent nights sleeping on hospital floors. His appearance changed. The perfect suits gave way to jeans and sweaters covered in dog hair. He smiled, actually smiled, when Shadow managed to eat a full meal. "He's different," his CFO, Patricia Hammond, told the board. "5 years ago, we lost the human Marcus and got a profit machine. Now, he's coming back." Marcus's grief, frozen since the accident, began thawing in Shadow's presence. He found himself talking to the dog about Emma and Lily, conversations he couldn't have with humans. Shadow would listen, his good eye focused, occasionally touching Marcus with a paw as if to say, "I understand loss too." One night, Marcus broke completely. Shadow had managed his first unassisted walk to the water bowl, a triumph that somehow triggered Marcus's tears. 5 years of suppressed agony poured out while Shadow, exhausted from his achievement, pressed against Marcus's side. The dog who'd been denied physical comfort for 15 years gave it instinctively to the man who needed it. Sarah Mitchell was fighting her own battle. Her 8-year-old son, David, had seen the news coverage and asked painful questions. "Mom, did Grandpa really hurt that dog?" "It's complicated, sweetheart. But the dog was a hero. He saved people. Why would Grandpa hurt a hero?" Sarah had no good answers. Her memories of those years were a kaleidoscope of shame: her father's drunken rages, Shadow's whimpers from the shed, her own cowardice. She'd run to college, to marriage, to divorce, to anywhere that wasn't that house. But geography couldn't cure guilt. The legal bills were mounting. The lawyer she'd hired, sensing opportunity, pushed for aggressive action. "We could get millions in settlement. Blackstone would pay that to make this go away." But every time Sarah visited the hospital, seeing Shadow's slow recovery, watching Marcus's devotion, her resolve weakened. She encountered Tom Bradley one evening, both arriving at the hospital simultaneously. She recognized him as the mute neighbor who'd lived behind their property. "You can speak," she said, not surprised. "Always could. Chose not to." Tom's voice carried 15 years of judgment. "You knew what was happening." "I was young, scared. So was Shadow. Difference is, he couldn't run away." Tom's secret burden grew heavier as the court date approached. He knew things that would destroy everyone's narratives. The classified files he'd hidden contained details about Shadow's final mission that no one else knew. The truth about why Shadow was at Marcus's accident scene. The real reason the government wanted Shadow contained, every night. Tom sat in his motel room, drinking whiskey and staring at documents that could explode everything. His memories haunted him. Shadow before the trauma, magnificent and proud. Their partnership in Afghanistan, perfect synchronization between man and dog. The mission briefings where Shadow sat at attention, seeming to understand every word. The night Shadow saved Tom's life, taking a knife meant for his handler's throat. "I failed you, brother," Tom whispered to Shadow during a late-night visit. Shadow's tail moved slightly, forgiveness offered without hesitation. The tensions reached a breaking point when someone threw a brick through Marcus's office window with a note, "Rich boy's guilt won't save him." The next day, Sarah's car tires were slashed. "Dog killer's daughter" painted on her hood. The police increased patrols, but the damage was done. The case had become a proxy war for every grievance in the community. Death threats arrived daily. Marcus hired security for the hospital, for Sarah, even for Tom. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories. Shadow was a government experiment. Marcus had caused his own family's accident. Sarah was hiding millions in insurance money. The truth became irrelevant in the face of narrative warfare. Yet unexpected allies emerged. Dr. Wright, initially skeptical of Marcus's obsession, became Shadow's fiercest advocate, testifying to anyone who'd listen about the dog's will to live. Father Daniel Murphy from St. Catherine's began holding prayer circles for Shadow's recovery, bringing together both camps in moments of spiritual truce. Children were Shadow's most powerful supporters. They sent hundreds of letters and drawings to the hospital. Marcus read them to Shadow during recovery sessions. "Dear Shadow, you are the bravest dog ever. I hope you get better and can play fetch again. Love, Katie, age 6. Shadow's ears would perk up at these young voices recorded in crayon and hope, a group of animal shelter workers. Initially resentful of resources spent on one dog while hundreds died in shelters, changed their position after meeting Shadow. His eyes, even the damaged one, held something that transcended species. They began advocating for him, understanding that Shadow represented every abandoned animal's hope for redemption. Local businesses chose sides by posting signs, Team Shadow or Justice for Sarah. The divisions ran through families, friendships, churches. But at the hospital, in Shadow's room, none of that mattered. There was only a dog learning to trust again and a man learning to feel again, both discovering that healing happened not in grand gestures but in small moments of connection. The preliminary hearing was set for the following Monday. Judge Coleman would decide Shadow's fate while the nation watched. Marcus's legal team prepared arguments about abandonment and abuse. Sarah's lawyer countered with property rights and redemption. Tom Bradley held secrets that could destroy them all. And Shadow, unaware he'd become a symbol of America's divisions, managed his first successful game of fetch 3 throws before exhaustion, while Marcus laughed for the first time in 5 years. The war raged outside, but inside that small hospital room, peace existed in the space between a broken man and a broken dog who'd found in each other the possibility of becoming whole again. The courthouse steps resembled a battlefield. Police barriers held back hundreds of protesters while news vans lined the street like military vehicles. Judge Patricia Coleman had moved the hearing to the largest courtroom, anticipating the crowd. By 7 a.m., every seat was filled. Marcus entered through a side door, his security detail forming a protective shield against the shouting and cameras. Sarah Mitchell arrived separately, clutching her son David's hand. The boy looked terrified by the mob screaming his mother's name, some in support, others in condemnation. Her lawyer, Kenneth Walsh, guided them through, his smile revealing his pleasure at the media attention. This case would make his career regardless of outcome. Judge Coleman, 65 years old with 30 years on the bench, had never seen anything like this. A custody hearing for a dog had become a national referendum on wealth, justice, and redemption. She gavelled for order repeatedly before achieving relative quiet. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine temporary custody," she announced. "I will not tolerate outbursts. Anyone disrupting these proceedings will be removed and charged with contempt." Kenneth Walsh stood first, his opening argument crafted for cameras rather than law. "Your Honor, this case is simple. Shadow resided on property owned by the Mitchell family for 15 years. By Connecticut law, this establishes clear ownership. Mr. Blackstone, however wealthy, cannot simply take what he desires because he finds it convenient." Rebecca Stone, Marcus's attorney, rose with controlled fury. "Convenient, Your Honor, we're discussing 15 years of documented torture, abandonment, criminal neglect. Miss Mitchell admits she knew about the abuse. She fled rather than report it. She forfeited any claim to Shadow the moment she chose her own comfort over his life." "My client was a victim too," Walsh countered. 23 years old, terrorized by an abusive father. Should we punish her for surviving? The first witness was Dr. Wright. He described Shadow's condition in clinical detail: the embedded chain, infections, organ failure, malnutrition so severe it had altered bone structure. The courtroom gasped at photographs of Shadow on arrival. Several people left, unable to stomach the images. "In 30 years of veterinary practice," Dr. Wright testified, "I've never seen suffering this prolonged or deliberate. This wasn't neglect, it was torture." Walsh cross-examined aggressively. "But Shadow survived, correct? Perhaps the care wasn't ideal, but care, Dr. Wright's composure cracked. "Mr. Walsh, that dog counted every day of his imprisonment. He scratched 5,475 marks into wood. That's not survival. That's endurance of agony that would break most humans." Sarah took the stand next, tears flowing before she spoke. "I loved Shadow," she began, voice trembling. "When Dad brought him home, I was thrilled. A hero dog. He said Shadow would help Dad with his PTSD from his service. For maybe 2 weeks. It was beautiful. Shadow was gentle, protective, wonderful with neighborhood kids. What changed? Walsh prompted. Dad's drinking got worse. He became paranoid, convinced enemies were coming for Shadow. The chain was supposedly temporary, just until Dad could build a proper fence. But days became weeks. Weeks became months. Every time I protested, Dad would... She showed old medical records. Broken arm, cracked ribs, concussion, all from falling downstairs. Marcus watched her testimony with conflicting emotions. Her pain was real, but Shadow's suffering eclipsed everything. When Stone cross-examined, asking why Sarah never called police after her father's death 5 years ago, Sarah's answer chilled the room. I thought Shadow was dead. Dad told me he'd put him down years earlier. I never went near that shed. I couldn't. When Mr. Blackstone found him alive, God forgive me. I wished Shadow had died. At least then his suffering would have ended. The proceedings were interrupted when Marcus's phone buzzed urgently. Doctor. Wright's text sent ice through his veins. Shadow's collapsed. Come now. Your Honor, Rebecca Stone announced. Shadow's had a medical emergency. We request immediate recess. Judge Coleman nodded. Court will reconvene at 2 p.m. Marcus ran from the courthouse, his bodyguard struggling to keep pace. The hospital was 3 miles away. Traffic was gridlocked from the media circus. Marcus abandoned his car, sprinting through streets while cameras tracked his desperate flight. Shadow lay on the operating table, his breathing shallow and labored. Dr. Wright met Marcus at the door. His heart's failing. The stress of recovery, the surgeries, his age, it's all catching up. We're doing everything possible, but no buts, Marcus said firmly, though his voice shook. He doesn't die today. Sarah arrived minutes later, having followed when she heard. She and Marcus stood on opposite sides of Shadow's unconscious form, their legal battle momentarily forgotten in shared fear. Shadow's body looked impossibly small, diminished without his conscious strength. He was magnificent once, Sarah whispered. Before Dad destroyed him. Marcus didn't respond, focused entirely on Shadow's faint breathing. An hour passed. Then 2. Shadow's vitals stabilized slowly. When his good eye finally opened, it found Marcus immediately, tail attempting movement despite the sedation. Court reconvened with both parties exhausted. Judge Coleman noted their disheveled appearances but proceeded. I understand Shadow's condition is precarious. Perhaps we should postpone. No, Marcus interrupted. Shadow needs certainty. He needs to know where he belongs. Tom Bradley was called as the next witness. The courtroom stirred, recognizing him as the mute vagrant from news coverage. When he spoke, his voice carried military authority that commanded immediate attention. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bradley, retired, K-9 Unit Commander, Afghanistan, 2003 to 2009. Shadow was my partner. Yes, so the revelation sent shockwaves through the gallery. Tom continued, each word measured. I've remained silent for 15 years, pretending disability to stay close to Shadow. I fed him nightly, watched him deteriorate, and did nothing substantial to save him. That's my shame to carry. Why didn't you intervene? Judge Coleman asked. Because I'm a coward, Your Honor, and because the truth about Shadow is classified at levels that could compromise national security. Tom pulled out a folder. I'm breaking federal law by revealing this, but Shadow deserves truth before he dies. Rebecca Stone stood. Your Honor, if this testimony involves classified information, I'll face consequences later. Tom said. Shadow can't wait for bureaucracy. He opened the folder. Shadow's final mission wasn't just a kidnapping rescue. Senator Phillips' daughter Emma was taken by foreign operatives seeking leverage over her father's committee. Shadow didn't just find her. He eliminated an entire terror cell, alone, 6 trained killers, and Shadow took them all down to save one 7-year-old girl. The courtroom erupted. Judge Coleman gavelled frantically for order, but Tom wasn't finished. The trauma Shadow suffered during that mission broke something in his mind, Not his loyalty, not his courage, but his ability to separate past from present. He'd imprinted on Emma Phillips, protected her with obsession that concerned his handlers. When she grew up, married, had a child, Shadow somehow knew. Don't ask me how, but he knew. Tom turned to Marcus. 5 years ago, the night your family died, Shadow was being transported to a veterans facility. The van crashed 2 miles from your accident site. Shadow escaped, injured, and ran toward something. We found blood trails leading directly to your crash. Witnesses reported a German shepherd trying to pull bodies from the wreckage. Marcus's legs gave out. Rebecca Stone caught him, guided him to his chair. The courtroom held its breath as Tom continued. Shadow dragged himself 3 miles on 2 broken legs, trying to get help. He collapsed at the nearest structure, the Mitchell property. Robert Mitchell found him, recognized the canine badge, and called his military contacts. They told him to contain Shadow, that he'd be collected soon. But Shadow's injuries, his age, his trauma, the military wrote him off, told Mitchell to handle it. Robert's handling was that chain. Sarah sobbed openly. Dad said Shadow was dangerous, that he'd attacked people at an accident. We thought he'd turned vicious. He was trying to save them, Tom said quietly. Just like he'd saved Emma 17 years before. He was doing his job, and we punished him for it. Marcus stood slowly, his face transformed by terrible understanding. He walked to the witness stand, stopping directly in front of Tom. Shadow knew Emma. He tried to save her again. Yes. He failed because he was too injured, too old. Yes. And for trying, he was chained in hell for 5 more years. Yes. The emotional explosion that followed cleared half the courtroom. Marcus collapsed against the witness stand, sobbing with abandon that 5 years of therapy hadn't achieved. Sarah crumpled in her seat. The weight of her father's cruelty finally understood. Even Judge Coleman wiped her eyes, her professional composure shattered. Tom Bradley finished his testimony with one final revelation. I have here a letter from Emma Blackstone, written when she was 25, after she learned Shadow's identity. She'd been searching for him for years. He read, Shadow gave me life twice, once at 7, and again by teaching me that courage means acting despite fear. If you find him, tell him Emma remembers. Tell him he's the reason I lived to find love, have a daughter, experience joy. Tell him he succeeded in every way that matters. Marcus asked for immediate recess. Judge Coleman granted it, and Marcus ran back to the hospital. Shadow was conscious, barely, but his eye tracked Marcus's entrance. Marcus knelt beside the bed, taking Shadow's paw gently. You knew her, Marcus whispered. You knew my Emma. You tried to save her. Shadow's reaction was immediate and profound. His entire body shuddered. A sound emerged from his throat, not quite a bark, closer to a cry of recognition. His tail moved with more energy than he'd shown in weeks. Marcus pulled out his phone, finding a video of Emma and Lily from 6 years ago. Emma's laugh filled the room. Shadow's ear perked up, his eye widening. He tried to stand, desperate to reach the phone, to reach the voice he'd protected as a child and failed to save as an adult. She loved you, Marcus told Shadow. She looked for you her whole life. She named our daughter Lily because you loved lilies. Tom told me you'd always stop to smell them on patrol. Shadow's eye fixed on Marcus with intelligence that transcended species. In that moment, both understood their connection completely. They were bound by love for the same souls, by failure to save them, by survival neither wanted but both endured. Shadow had spent 5 years in chains for trying to save Emma. Marcus had spent 5 years in chains of his own making for surviving when she didn't. Marcus held Shadow's head gently, their foreheads touching. We both lost her, he whispered. We both failed. We both survived. And somehow, we found each other. Shadow's tail wagged with strength that shouldn't have existed in his broken body. For the first time in 15 years, he barked clear, strong, purposeful. Not the whimper of a beaten dog or the cry of suffering, but the bark of a soldier acknowledging his commander, a partner recognizing his equal, a soul finding its mirror in another's pain and perseverance. The courtroom reconvened for final arguments, but everyone knew the case had fundamentally changed. This wasn't about ownership anymore. It was about redemption, about circles closing, about love that transcended death and species and logic. Shadow had brought Marcus back to life by nearly losing his own. Marcus had freed Shadow by recognizing their shared captivity. Judge Coleman would make her ruling. But in the hospital room where a billionaire held a dying hero, the verdict had already been rendered by a force higher than law. They belonged to each other, these two broken souls, bound by the ghost of a woman they'd both failed to save and the love that failure had taught them to give. Dr. Wright's face told Marcus everything before the words came. The test results spread across the desk painted a picture of inevitable decline. Shadow's kidneys were shutting down, his liver barely functioning, his heart working at 30% capacity. The surgeries, the treatments, the world's best specialists, none of it could reverse 15 years of systematic destruction. 2 weeks, Dr. Wright said quietly. Maybe less. His organs are failing in sequence. We can manage pain, keep him comfortable. But, Mr. Blackstone, we've reached the limit of what medicine can do. Marcus stood at the window overlooking the parking lot where protesters still maintained their vigil. Get me Dr. Yamamoto from Tokyo. The experimental stem cell treatments. Whatever Switzerland is doing with organ regeneration. I don't care what it costs. Mr. Blackstone. I said I don't care what it costs. Marcus's voice cracked. There has to be something. Someone. Somewhere. But even as specialists arrived from Berlin, Sydney, and Sao Paulo, their conclusions remained unchanged. Shadow's body had given everything it had. The miracle wasn't that he was dying, but that he'd lived this long at all. Marcus spent $3 million in 4 days, chasing hope that didn't exist. Sarah Mitchell arrived at the hospital the morning after the court hearing, carrying a box of documents. Marcus tensed when he saw her, but her face showed only exhaustion and grief. I'm withdrawing the legal claim, she said simply. Shadow belongs with you. He always did. Marcus studied her carefully. Your lawyer won't like that. I fired him. Sarah sat down, the box heavy in her lap. I need to tell you things about what really happened, about my father. You deserve to know. And Shadow. Yes, She looked through the window where Shadow lay sleeping. Shadow deserves to have the truth told. She opened the box, revealing photographs, medical records, journals. Dad wasn't always cruel. The military broke something in him. PTSD, traumatic brain injury. They called it different things. But after he got Shadow, it became something else. Paranoia. Rage. Sarah pulled out a child's drawing stick figures of a girl, a man, and a dog. I drew this when I was 9. That's me. Dad. And our previous dog. Ranger. Dad loved that dog. When Ranger died, Dad cried for weeks. So when he brought Shadow home, I thought maybe the old Dad was coming back. What happened? Shadow was different. Professional. He'd play with us kids, but his eyes were always watching, always protecting. Dad became convinced Shadow was still active, that enemies would come for him. The drinking got worse. One night, I heard Dad in the shed, interrogating Shadow like he was a prisoner of war, asking about missions, about handlers. Shadow just sat there, patient. Even when Dad hit him, Sarah's hands shook pulling out the next photo Shadow in the early days of captivity. The chain still new. I tried to unchain him once. I was 13. Dad caught me, broke my wrist, told everyone I fell off my bike. Said if I tried again, he'd kill Shadow in front of me. I believed him. You were a child, Marcus said, surprising himself with the compassion in his voice. I was a coward. Every night, I heard Shadow crying. Every morning, I'd see him through my window, waiting. He never stopped waiting. Even after we abandoned the property, even after Dad died, some part of me knew Shadow was still there, still waiting. I just couldn't face what we'd done. And the community's response to Shadow's decline transformed from division to unity. Father Murphy organized an interdenominational prayer service that filled the hospital parking lot. Jews, Christians, Muslims, and atheists stood together. Candles flickering in the darkness, prayers in dozen languages rising for one dying dog. Veterans arrived from across the country, forming an honor guard that rotated every 6 hours. They stood at attention outside Shadow's room, saluting each time Marcus or the medical staff passed. Some were in wheelchairs, some on crutches, but they stood guard over their brother in arms. Children's offerings accumulated in the hospital lobby: stuffed animals, drawings, letters, and toys. A little girl named Madison left her favorite teddy bear with a note for Shadow, so he won't be lonely. Mr. Bear protected me from monsters. Now he can protect Shadow. The president sent a letter acknowledging Shadow's service. Celebrities offered money for treatments. The story went global. Newspapers from London to Tokyo carried updates on Shadow's condition. But in the hospital room, none of that mattered. Shadow had good moments that felt like miracles. One afternoon, he managed to stand unassisted and take 5 steps to his water bowl. Marcus cheered like Shadow had won gold at Westminster. That evening, Shadow played fetch for the first time since rescue 3 weak throws of a tennis ball, but his tail wagged with pure joy. He's never had ice cream, Tom mentioned during a visit. Marcus immediately had chocolate-free vanilla brought from the best gelateria in Connecticut. Shadow's expression tasting sweetness for the first time in his life made everyone in the room cry. He licked the bowl clean, then looked for more with such hope that Marcus ordered a case delivered daily. But for every good moment, 2 bad ones followed. Shadow's legs stopped supporting him. His breathing became labored. The cocktail of medications keeping him comfortable grew longer and more complex. Marcus had a bed brought into the hospital room, refusing to leave even for board meetings that determined billions in corporate futures. "You're losing everything," Rebecca Stone warned during a visit. "The board is discussing your removal. Stock prices are plummeting. Your entire empire." "Let it fall," Marcus said, not looking away from Shadow. "I've learned what actually matters." Tom Bradley arrived one evening when Marcus had briefly stepped out for coffee. He found Shadow alone, barely conscious but aware enough to recognize his old handler's scent. Tom knelt beside the bed, his weathered hands gentle on Shadow's head. "Achtung," Tom whispered in German, the attention command from their service days. Shadow's ear twitched, his eye struggling to focus. "Guter Hund, brave soldier." Tom ran through their old commands, each one a memory of when they were both young and strong and believed they could save the world. Shadow responded to each with tiny movements, a paw twitch for stay, a head tilt for search, the ghost of alertness for protect. "You did your duty, soldier," Tom said, his voice breaking. "You saved them all, Emma, those kids in Afghanistan. Even Marcus, you saved him from himself. Mission complete. Shadow. Mission complete." Tom stood at attention, his old bones protesting, and delivered a perfect salute. Shadow's tail moved once, acknowledging the honor. "Rest now, good soldier. Your watch is ended." When Marcus returned, he found Tom crying 15 years of stored tears finally released. They sat together, 2 men bound by love for the same remarkable soul, waiting for the inevitable. The final decline came suddenly. Shadow woke one morning unable to lift his head. His breathing was shallow, his heartbeat irregular. Doctor, right, adjusted medications. But they all knew they were managing, not healing. Sarah visited that afternoon with David. Her son had insisted on meeting Shadow, on apologizing for his grandfather. The boy approached slowly, respectfully, the way one might approach a shrine. "I'm sorry my grandpa hurt you," David whispered. "Mom says you're a hero. Heroes shouldn't be hurt." Shadow's eye found the boy, and impossibly his tail moved. Not much, just a tiny wag. But David gasped with delight. "He forgives us. Mom, he forgives us." Sarah knelt beside Shadow, tears flowing freely. "I'm so sorry. For all of it. For every day you suffered while I did nothing. For every night you were cold and alone. For choosing my fear over your freedom." Shadow's paw moved slightly, touching Sarah's hand. Absolution given without hesitation. The way only dogs can forgive completely, immediately, without reservation. Marcus held Shadow constantly now, afraid that if he let go, Shadow would too. He talked endlessly about Emma, about Lily, about the life they'd all have together and whatever came after this. Shadow listened, his eye never leaving Marcus's face, as if memorizing it for a journey he'd soon take alone. "You brought me back," Marcus whispered during one long night. "I was dead inside, Shadow, dead for 5 years. You made me feel again, hurt again, love again. You gave me back my heart, even as yours is failing." Shadow's breathing grew more labored with each passing hour. The veterans outside stood straighter. The prayers grew more fervent. The children's drawings covered every wall of the hospital room. And in the center of it all, a broken dog who'd survived the unsurvivable was finally allowed to stop fighting, surrounded by more love than he'd known existed in the world. Peace settled into Shadow's eye, not the peace of surrender, but of completion. Every person he'd saved, every life he'd touched, every heart he'd healed while his own body broke it, had all mattered. He hadn't failed, not Emma, not Marcus, not even himself. He'd given everything, and in the end, everything had been enough. The tragedy wasn't that Shadow was dying. It was that it had taken so long for the world to show him the love he'd always deserved. Tom Bradley arrived at Marcus's hotel suite at midnight, carrying a locked briefcase that hadn't been opened in 15 years. His hands shook as he set it on the table, the weight of its contents heavier than the physical documents inside. "I should have shown you these weeks ago," Tom said, spinning the combination lock. "Hell, I should have shown them to someone years ago, but I was bound by oaths, classifications, and my own cowardice." The briefcase opened to reveal folders stamped with security classifications that had expired but never been declassified. Tom pulled out the first file, marked Operation Guardian, eyes only. "Shadow wasn't just a military working dog," Tom began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his revelation. "He was part of a CIA program that officially never existed, enhanced canine units for operations too sensitive for human assets. Shadow was their greatest success and, ultimately, their biggest problem." Marcus read the documents, his disbelief growing with each page. Shadow had been involved in 17 classified operations across 4 countries. He'd identified 3 double agents within allied governments. He'd tracked terrorists through urban environments where human surveillance was impossible. But it was the domestic operations that chilled Marcus's blood. "They used him to spy on American citizens?" Marcus asked, horrified. "Suspected terrorists?" "Initially. Then it expanded. Politicians, journalists, anyone deemed a potential threat. Shadow could be anywhere. A gentle dog in a park. While recording everything. His collar contained technology that wasn't supposed to exist in 2007. Tom pulled out photographs Shadow with handlers Marcus didn't recognize, in locations that looked distinctly like American suburbs rather than foreign battlefields. The kidnapping of Emma Phillips wasn't random. Senator Phillips was investigating the K-9 program. Someone leaked his daughter's school route, her schedule. It was meant to be leveraged to shut down his investigation. Someone set up a 7-year-old to be kidnapped. And they didn't count on Shadow going rogue. He was supposed to track and observe, wait for backup. Instead, he eliminated 6 operatives who were technically on our side. Saved Emma, but exposed the entire program. That's why he had to disappear. Marcus felt sick. The Mitchells were paid $200,000 to take Shadow and keep him contained, not retired imprisoned. The chain wasn't Robert Mitchell's paranoid delusion. It was ordered. Shadow knew too much, had seen too much. They couldn't kill a hero, but they could make him disappear. Tom handed over another document, this one more recent. I hired a private investigator 3 years ago, used my pension to pay him. He found something that explains everything. The report was thorough, professional, and devastating. Emma Phillips Blackstone had spent years searching for the dog who'd saved her. She'd hired investigators, contacted military officials, even reached out to underground networks that traded in classified information. 2 months before her death, she'd finally found a lead. She knew Shadow was at the Mitchell property, Marcus whispered. She was planning to go there. The investigator found her calendar. She'd blocked out October 15th, 2019 with just one note: find Shadow. That was the day before the accident. Marcus finished. She was going to rescue him, Tom nodded, but someone knew she was getting close. The accident investigation was closed too quickly. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Marcus, I don't think your family's death was random. The room spun. Marcus gripped the table, his mind racing through implications too terrible to fully grasp. You're saying Emma and Lily were murdered because Emma was trying to find Shadow. I'm saying powerful people wanted Shadow's story buried forever. Your wife threatened that. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. Sarah Mitchell was crying so hard she could barely speak. Mr. Blackstone, I found something. In Dad's things. You need to see this. Now. 20 minutes later, Sarah met them in the hospital lobby, clutching an envelope yellowed with age. This was in Dad's safety deposit box. I just got access after 5 years of probate. It's... God, I don't know how to say this. The letter was in Robert Mitchell's handwriting, dated a week before his death. If you're reading this, I'm dead. And maybe that's for the best. I can't live with what I've done anymore. The dog Shadow wasn't just abandoned with us. We were his jailers, and I was his torturer. They paid me to break him. Men in suits who never gave names but had credentials that meant I couldn't refuse. They wanted information Shadow had not in any file or collar, but in his head. They believed dogs could retain visual memories of classified locations, faces, conversations. They wanted me to extract those memories through enhanced interrogation. I tortured that hero for 3 years before giving up. Electric shocks, waterboarding, starvation techniques I learned in black sites overseas. Shadow never broke, never gave them anything. Just looked at me with eyes that understood exactly what was happening and forgave me anyway. That forgiveness destroyed me worse than any torture could. The chain wasn't to contain him, it was to break his spirit. Make him forget whatever he knew. But Shadow never forgot. Not the missions, not the people he'd saved, not even the kindness he'd known before we destroyed him. He remembered it all and somehow kept his soul intact while I lost mine entirely. Sarah, baby girl, I'm sorry you saw what you saw. Sorry I became a monster. The money's in account 4478912K at Farmington Savings. Blood money. Use it to help him if he's somehow still alive. Though God knows death would be kinder than what I did to him. They're still watching. The accident that killed Senator Phillips' daughter, that was them cleaning up. They'll come for me eventually. The cancer might get me first, but if not, you'll probably find me dead from suicide. Either way, I deserve worse than I'll get. Tell Shadow I'm sorry. Tell him Corporal Robert Mitchell knew exactly what honor he destroyed. Tell him even devils can recognize angels. And I spent 15 years torturing one. The letter shook in Sarah's hands. The account had $300,000. Blood money. He called it, for torturing Shadow. Marcus stood abruptly, rage and grief battling for dominance. We need to make this public. Now! If we do that, Tom warned, powerful people will move to silence us all. Let them try. Marcus pulled out his phone. Michael Chen, I have your story. Bring your best team to the hospital. And Michael, bring security. The expose that Michael Chen published 12 hours later broke the internet. American hero tortured by CIA program dominated every headline. The documents Tom provided, Robert Mitchell's confession, the financial records Sarah discovered, it painted a picture of governmental abuse that shocked a nation already cynical about its institutions. Within hours, congressional representatives demanded investigations. Veterans organizations called for justice. The Pentagon issued denials that contradicted themselves within paragraphs. The CIA refused comment, which said everything. But the most powerful response came from an unexpected source. The president, himself a veteran, held an emergency press conference. If these allegations are true, and the evidence suggests they are, then we have failed one of our most faithful servants in the most despicable way possible. Shadow served this nation with distinction and was rewarded with torture. This administration will ensure full investigation and accountability. By evening, 3 former CIA officials had been arrested. The program Tom had exposed was formally acknowledged and terminated. Shadow, dying in a hospital bed, had accomplished what senators and journalists couldn't. He'd exposed corruption at the highest levels simply by surviving long enough for the truth to surface. Father Murphy arrived as the media storm reached its peak. The elderly priest had known the Mitchell family for 40 years, had buried Robert, had tried unsuccessfully to save his soul. "I'd like to give Shadow last rites," Father Murphy said quietly. "I know he's not Catholic, not even human by church doctrine, but God's love transcends such boundaries." Marcus, who hadn't been inside a church since Emma's funeral, nodded. "Shadow transcends boundaries too, Father." The service was simple, profound. Father Murphy anointed Shadow's head with oil, speaking blessings in Latin and English. "This soul has borne witness to humanity's worst and best. He has suffered as Christ suffered, forgiven as Christ forgave. If heaven exists, its gates are already open for him." Shadow's eye tracked the priest's movements, peaceful despite his labored breathing. When Father Murphy finished, Shadow's tail moved once acknowledgement, gratitude, perhaps even faith. Marcus found himself praying for the first time in 5 years. Not for Shadow to live, that would be selfish now, but for Shadow to know, absolutely and forever, that he was loved, that his suffering had meaning, that his sacrifice mattered. Sarah knelt beside them, her own prayers mixing with tears. "Please, God, let him know we're sorry. Let him know he's forgiven us. Let him know he won." Tom Bradley stood at attention in the corner, silently reciting the soldier's prayer he'd learned 50 years ago. Outside, hundreds of people had gathered, candles flickering in the darkness, voices raised in hymns from every faith tradition. The truth had set them all free, Shadow from his secret burden of classified knowledge, Marcus from not knowing why his family died, Sarah from guilt she'd carried half her life, Tom from oaths that had chained him as surely as Shadow had been chained. But freedom, Marcus was learning, didn't mean healing. It meant facing pain honestly, completely, with the same courage Shadow had shown every day for 15 years. It meant choosing love despite loss, hope despite evidence to the contrary, forgiveness despite unforgivable acts. Shadow had taught them all that survival wasn't about the body. It was about the soul's refusal to surrender its capacity for love, even when that love brought nothing but pain. He'd loved Emma enough to try saving her twice. He'd loved enough to forgive his torturers. He'd loved enough to trust Marcus when trust should have been impossible. Now, surrounded by truth and tears and trembling hands holding his own, Shadow could finally rest knowing his love had been received, reciprocated, and would ripple outward long after his broken body surrendered. The reversal was complete. The tortured had become the teacher. The abandoned had become the beloved. The chain that had bound him for 15 years had become the connection binding hundreds of hearts together in shared witness to one dog's invincible spirit. And somewhere in heaven, Emma Blackstone smiled, knowing her hero had finally been found. Shadow passed at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. As rain fell gently against the hospital windows, Marcus held him, singing "You Are My Sunshine," Lily's favorite song, the one Emma hummed while cooking, the melody that had filled their home with joy. Shadow's eye remained fixed on Marcus's face as his breathing slowed, then stopped. His tail gave one final, barely perceptible wag, a goodbye, a thank you, a promise that love transcends death. The nation mourned. President Harrison ordered flags at half-staff, unprecedented for an animal. The Pentagon posthumously awarded Shadow the Distinguished Service Cross. Children across America sent 50,000 letters to Marcus. Each one read aloud at Shadow's memorial service. Veterans from every state formed an honor guard as Shadow's flag-draped casket was carried to its final rest. But Shadow's death was not his end, it was his beginning. Marcus established Shadow's Haven with an initial endowment of $100 million. The facility, built on the land where Shadow had suffered, transformed trauma into triumph. Where the shed had stood, a state-of-the-art veterinary hospital rose. The chain that had bound Shadow was melted down, reforged into a bell that rang whenever an animal was saved. Tom Bradley, finally free from his silence, became the Haven's honorary director. His voice, unused for 15 years, now spoke for those who couldn't speak. He trained veterans in animal therapy, teaching them that healing happened in both directions. Sarah Mitchell found redemption as the Haven's head veterinarian. Her son David became its youngest volunteer, reading to frightened dogs the way he wished someone had read to Shadow. Together, they transformed their family's shame into service. The partnership between Marcus and Sarah, once adversaries in court, became a model for reconciliation. They worked 16-hour days, saving animals others had abandoned. Neither spoke of forgiveness, they lived it instead, honoring Shadow through action rather than words. 1 year later, 10,000 animals had passed through Shadow's Haven. Dogs, cats, horses, even exotic birds, all creatures abandoned, abused, forgotten. Each saved life added another mark to a wall, but these marks counted redemption, not imprisonment. The statue unveiling drew thousands. Bronze Shadow stood proud, young, whole, not as he'd died, but as he'd deserved to live. Children left flowers, veterans saluted. Marcus spoke simply. Shadow taught us that love survives everything, even us. That afternoon, Marcus walked to Shadow's grave, beside the memorial he'd built for Emma and Lily. A new dog walked beside him, a senior German shepherd named Hope, blind in one eye, rescued from a kill shelter. "You brought me back to life," Marcus whispered to Shadow's headstone. "Now I'll spend whatever time I have left giving others what you gave me, a second chance." The inscription on Shadow's monument read, "No greater love than this K9 237 Shadow who saved us all." Hope wagged his tail. "And somewhere beyond sight, but never beyond love." Shadow wagged his too. Shadow's story reminds us that family isn't defined by blood or species, but by who refuses to abandon us in our darkest moments. Marcus had billions but lived empty until a dying dog taught him that gratitude isn't about what we have. It's about recognizing what we've been given, even through loss. Shadow, tortured for 15 years, still chose to trust, to love, to forgive. His gratitude for the smallest kindness, a gentle touch, a bowl of ice cream, hearing his name spoken with love, transformed everyone around him. The true family Shadow created wasn't biological, but spiritual. Marcus, who lost everything and found purpose. Sarah, who inherited shame and chose redemption. Tom, who broke 15 years of silence to speak truth, and thousands of strangers who became connected through one dog's story. They discovered that gratitude grows strongest in broken soil, that families form not from perfection, but from shared willingness to heal together. Shadow waited 475 days for rescue, never losing faith that love would find him. Have you ever witnessed someone suffer unjustly like Shadow, abandoned, forgotten, or punished for simply trying to help while others looked away? What did you do, or wish you had done differently?